Hey everyone, Cory from Aquarium Co-op. Today, we're answering the question, how long until I can add fish to my new aquarium? We've got like a checklist of things that I like to go through, whether it's in my store that I own or whether it's here in my fish room, that gets me ready to know, am I likely to have success with the fish I'm going to buy? So the first thing I look for is, do I have algae? That's right. I want some algae in the aquarium, not a real bad outbreak, but I basically want proof of life. That's really what I'm looking for. And so getting the aquarium set up and actually having something growing, algae, whether it's on the glass, or maybe it's on a plant, or maybe it's on the gravel, that just shows me that we have something living and it can start processing some of the waste. And it's the first sign of, hey, this aquarium is alive and therefore might be ready, and I move on to the next thing. The next thing would be, do I have plant growth? Most of my tanks all use plants, and if I have some algae growth and my plants are starting to grow a little bit, now I'm really looking at going, this tank's really pushing forward. It's time to move on and add some fish, basically. But there's other factors we want to make sure that we've checked it off, and this is that run of them. Next up would be, do I have some nitrates in there? Now, you might have read a whole bunch about cycling an aquarium and stuff like that, and I've got videos on how I don't necessarily subscribe to that, and I would say more, we want a well-seasoned aquarium, but I basically want to be able to prove that I can make nitrates, and so, or at least I've got some bacteria that will help me in this process. So yes, I've got algae helping me, yes, I've got plants helping me, but do I have something in there that I can actually read with a test strip or a liquid kit? I want to make sure I can do those processes. And so until I can detect something, I don't start yet. So detectable nitrates, I want to see anywhere between 10 to 50 parts per million, whether that's from fertilizer or decomposing stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I also, on the check, I want to check and make sure there's no ammonia, right? So we're checking what are the things I need to do before I can add fish. No ammonia. I also need to check and say there's no nitrite. So we've got no ammonia, no nitrite, but we do have some nitrate. That's what we're looking for. The next thing while we're testing water, I like to look at pH. Is the pH at least 7? Now, there are some species out there that would like to be lower, but the vast majority of everything wants to be above 7. And this is purely about freshwater. If you were talking saltwater, we're talking different stuff here. But above 7 is where I want to start always, because we don't even have a tank going yet. And basically, the longer your tank is set up, the more likely the pH is to drift down. And we don't want to crash it. So we want to start at least at 7. That's where my check. Do I check the water? I got at least 7. Could be 7.5, could be 7.2, could be 8, 8.2. Doesn't matter. Is it 7 or above? That's what I look for. The next thing I look for is my water 74 degrees or warmer. Typically, I want to be somewhere between 74 and 78. However, some species, like rams and apistos and discus and maybe even clown loaches, want to be 80 or higher. Bettas like 78 to 80. But at least 74 for 90% of the fish out there. Want to make sure that the temperature is stable and not going on a whim of like, well, I set my heater and it should be that. I actually want to confirm and check that off the list. Next up, do we have something that's actually feeding the aquarium? Now, I know that sounds weird. You don't have any fish yet, but we're looking at something to supply the algae and the plants and the bacteria with food. Now, there's a couple ways to do that. I'll lay them out here. One would be a piece of wood. Do you have a real piece of wood in there, sitting in there? It will start rotting, and as it starts to rot, it will supply some nutrients to the water, which will help all those things we just talked about. So wood is a way to do that. Next would be fertilizer. Do you have something like our Easy Green or another fertilizer that will fuel the algae and the plants? Now, don't worry, long term, we'll be growing lots of plants and not so much algae, but in the beginning, you can't really avoid algae, so we embrace it, and then we balance our tank later down the road to end up with beautiful plants. So fertilizer, Easy Green, another way to feed that aquarium. And the last way that I use is fish food. Maybe you've got, some of our fish foods here, and you can put little bits of fish food in there and just let them rot, basically. And you might go, wow, those pellets are taking a few days. Yes, but those nutrients will enter the system, and it will fuel all those things we're wanting to establish and make sure we've checked off. We've got algae, we've got plants, we've got bacteria because we have nitrates. We can check that box. We've got something feeding it, right? Now, you might have heard of like fishless cycling where you use ammonia to do that. I'm not as big of a fan of that. Yes, it can also feed an aquarium, but too much ammonia actually crashes things, and it can be kind of dangerous when you work with animals. But I like using these other things because they are continuous, they are slow, and they are things you're going to naturally do anyway. When you cycle with ammonia, once you're done, you never use ammonia again. Where all of these products, when you're done, and you have fish in the tank, you're still using them. So you haven't spent any extra money, and you have stuff that's going to continue to go on. And that's the goal, is just keep doing things to build up to where we're going to add fish. Next, do we have air or a sponge filter or circulation? So you can get lots of circulation up on the top of the water with maybe a cancer filter, a hang-on back, or a power head. You can pump air in with an air pump or a sponge filter. But you need something in there to get things going. Yes, there are filterless tanks that technically exist, but those are more advanced setups than getting and adding new fish to your aquarium. I personally won't run an aquarium without an air stone or something that is injecting air, mostly sponge filters, and I highly recommend that because it just takes one of the biggest portions of aquarium keeping and just goes, wow, that little device just makes that super simple for me. Next on the checklist, and there's very few things left, has it been at least 2 weeks since you set up the aquarium? Because you might be able to check all those things off in 5 days. But really, we want to make sure that the temperature's stable. We want to make sure the pH is stable. We want to make sure that the food source we put in is sticking around. We want to make sure that everything that could go wrong has stabilized. And so has it been at least 2 weeks? And I know you want to get in there and you want to go to the fish store and you want to buy stuff. And that's what leads us to the last check mark for me. And that is, do I have a snail? So you might go to the pet store, you might have them take a look at your water, and while you're there, I pick up like a ram's horn snail. And I put it in my aquarium so it's eating maybe some of that food I've been putting in there. Maybe it's starting to snack on a little bit of that algae that's growing. And I let that marinate and just make sure, like, yeah, the snail is thriving. He's living. It's been 3 or 4 days, doing well. And so normally what I would do is I go, maybe on weekend number 2, I pick up that snail. And then weekend number 3, I go, okay, well, I was able to check everything off the list that I just labeled. And now we are ready for fish. And so that is how long to wait. In my experience, it is somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks at the minimum, and it could take you longer. Maybe you're stuck on one of these check marks. That's okay. It's the longer you wait, the better chances you will have. Your chances are already good, but slow and steady wins the race when it comes to nature, especially with this. So you can also use this checklist every time you want to add fish, right? So maybe you just came home, you added fish, your tank is 3 weeks old, and now it's week 4 and you want to go back and buy more. Run through that checklist. Make sure you don't have ammonia. Make sure you don't have nitrite. Make sure everything's still growing. The water temperature is still good. All these things still check out. You're very likely to be ready to get some more fish then. It's also been a couple of weeks. So I said, the next weekend, I really try to go at least 2 weeks between adding different things. It allows you to adjust. So you're going to feed more when you have more fish. You're going to do things. Plants are going to grow. Algae is going to grow. You're going to make these adjustments. And 2 weeks is long enough to go, hey, is everything stable after I made the change? Where you might, pick something up on a Sunday night and then pretty soon you're buying on a Friday. Like, that's only kind of been 4 days at that point. So you refer back to this checklist. If you get into problems, you can also refer back and go, well, what step am I missing here? Where am I going wrong? And then also check out our videos on seasoned aquariums or a video to come that's the first 60 days of your aquarium.